Hey, what's happening? My name is D, and welcome back to Book Reviews with a Regular Dude. Today we're going to be talking about The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix Harrow. Yo, I did that in one take. I am so impressed with myself, baby. I put out a poll earlier this week, and it was between this book and Ebony Gate by Julia V. and Ken Babel, and it was no contest, so here we go. Let's read this premise. In a sprawling mansion filled with peculiar treasures, January Scalar is a curiosity herself. As the ward of the wealthy Mr. Locke, she feels little different from the artifacts that decorate the halls, carefully maintained, largely ignored, and utterly out of place. Then she finds a strange book. A book that carries the scent of other worlds and tells a tale of secret doors of love, adventure, and danger. Each page turn reveals impossible truths about the world, and January discovers a story increasingly entwined with her own. Oh, I did that in one take too. I am on fire today, baby. When I first heard about this book, I was told that it's a lot like The Starless Sea, but with more plot, or with more of a traditional plot structure. Which, yeah, that's a fair assessment, and I would agree. I think a lot of the things that I like about this book are things that it has in common with The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. It's not because it reminds me of The Starless Sea, it just so happens that I like those things. Finding like magic books or strange books, different worlds, magic, pretty poetic prose, bookish main characters, and excerpts about the power of words and storytellings and love of books and all that stuff. I don't want to keep comparing this book to The Starless Sea, but I think that while it's still less atmospheric, less descriptive, less flowery than The Starless Sea, some people might still find it a bit too much, but I really like it. I think that I like that kind of writing because I write poetry. There were a couple of things I thought were described as oily, maybe too often. Like the word oily started to stick out to me. And that's like a small little detail that I don't think actually matters, but it did bug me eventually. Like maybe 30% of the way through the book, I was like, okay, I get it. Can't remember what book I said this about. I know it was another YA fantasy because I've ended up reviewing a lot of YA fantasy on this channel, but some of the lines in this book could be read as lines from like a slam poem. And I know a lot of people say stuff like that when they're trying to mock, but because I'm actually a slam poet, I mean it in like a positive way. I like how little threads interwove in this book, and there weren't a ton of twists, you know, where you were taken by surprise, but there were a lot of like, oh yeah, moments where things just sort of clicked and it made the book, the story, more rich. As far as the plot goes, I wasn't held in suspense. I wasn't on my toes, like what's going to happen next. But I wasn't able to fully predict what was going to happen, which was cool. There are some really sweet romantic moments between a character named Yule and a character named Aid. They're from different worlds. They meet once and then they end up separated in their own respective worlds, and they go on very different journeys to try to find each other again. I really like their romance. I think it's a sweet story. I think this is an insta-love trope, though, and this is the first time I've ever experienced this trope in a book, because I don't read romance, really. I just don't really care about it that much. That's not true. I do care about romance, but I think that I prefer it as an ingredient in a story, not the whole thing. I don't think that I would like this trope in other books. Conceptually, I don't think I like insta-love because I like my romances to feel realistic. You know, like a book could have talking dragons and singing trees and butterflies that sting you and turn you into wood, but I would still want the romance or the relationships amongst characters to feel grounded and real. And from my understanding of like insta-love in movies and TV, those relationships tend to be pretty toxic, and romanticizing toxic relationships is a great way for me to hate whatever it is that I'm consuming. But in this book, it's pretty sweet, and I think because of the flowery writing, it's presented almost like a fairy tale, so it kind of gets a pass from me. There's some really sweet family moments too. There's some found family, reuniting with long lost family. I don't want to give too much away, but there's a scene where a mother and a daughter reunite after like close to 20 years, and it got me like not choked up, but I was like, damn. And because this is a fantasy, I gotta talk about the magic, and I think it's really cool. There's like magic doors that lead to other worlds, and I wish that we saw some more worlds or weirder worlds or whatever, and we didn't. They're mentioned, but we never go into them, and that's fine because, you know, be a lot to write or whatever, and make the book too long maybe. I don't know, but I would have loved to see some weirder, stranger worlds because that possibility is presented, but we never make good on that possibility, I suppose. And there's this other kind of magic that's like rune smithery, I think is what like D&D fantasy people would call it. I don't know, but like word working. It's cool. And it leads into that whole like words have power and the power stories and stuff like that. So it fits the theme of the book really well, and I think it adds to it. Okay, let's move on to things that I'm like conflicted about with this book, because there's a few. Firstly, the villains. They're just plot devices. 2 out of 3 of the ones that we interact with are just bad guys doing bad guy shit because that's what bad guys do. It's what the story needs to move forward. They're not interesting. They're not even cool. The third one, like, he's kind of interesting in the fact that he is a criticism of white supremacy and patriarchy and like white male privilege. The book tries to tell you that he's nuanced, and he just isn't. Like, to me, he's very much like a villain from an old Disney movie. And also, like, while he's the villain of the story, I don't think he's like the most important part of the story, which is a shame because I do like me a good villain, or I guess a bad villain. But yeah, the book tries to tell you that he's nuanced and complicated, but he isn't. He just sucks. There is like a unique twist on vampires in this book, which is hard to do, but I don't actually like the twist. This book has a lot of critique and commentary of systemic issues like patriarchy, racism, and a little bit of capitalism, but mostly racism. And to be completely honest, it felt kind of heavy-handed. Like, as I was reading this, I kept thinking to myself, like, okay, we get it. It's the early 1900s. Everybody was racist, even some of the good guys. And like I said, this book is set in like 1901 or something like that. And I get that racism was even more prevalent back then than it is now. And I think that it's a good thing that the author didn't shy away from that. But also, it's not fun to read for me, you know? And the book, like, condemns the racism. It's there for a reason. It isn't just glamorizing racism or just, like, trying to make you look at it like, look at how racist things used to be. It's like, purposeful. It's just not pleasant. Obviously, it's racism. And one of the reasons that I think that this makes me so uncomfortable is the main character, January Scholar, is biracial, and the author, Alix Harrow, is white. January being mixed race is a huge part of her character and a huge part of the story. So yeah, I'm conflicted because I don't think that a mixed race person's story is Alix Harrow's to write. I don't know if I'm gonna get like Alix Harrow fans in this video or whatever, and I understand that the reason that January is mixed race is because one of her parents comes from a different world where everybody looks different, and so it's not like a racial group from our world, but she ends up in our world and is treated like a person of color, like a mixed race person in our world, and it has real ramifications even if the parent who is a different color or is from a different race, is from a different world. It's from a fantasy world, and when that parent comes to this world, they're treated just like a black person or like an indigenous person in this world. So it has real ramifications, and it is a real reflection. So that argument that it's fine because one of the parents comes from a different world is moot. So don't even try me with that shit. I understand this is a complicated topic, and it's been discussed at length, and I personally believe that white authors probably shouldn't write main characters of color for a few reasons. Firstly, BIPOC authors are vastly underrepresented in the publishing industry. They don't get to have their stories told as often as their white colleagues, peers, counterparts, whatever. So when a white author comes in and tells a BIPOC story, they are taking up space that should be held for BIPOC authors. So in the case of The 10,000 Doors of January, I think that some of the emotional beats around like January's internalized racism and growing into self-acceptance and self-love would hit harder if it was written from the perspective of somebody who knows what it's like to be biracial, and obviously biracial. BIPOC stories and BIPOC struggles are not tools for white writers. Secondly, it isn't impossible, but it is very difficult for white writers to write characters of color accurately and respectfully. Without a ton of research and sensitivity readers, compassion, and just checking your own bias, it's very easy to fall into writing stereotypical characters that end up doing more harm to the marginalized community you're trying to represent and failing at. And thirdly, I just don't trust the intentions of the writer. Like, why do you want to write characters of color? Do you genuinely want your cast of characters to be more diverse? Do you want to elevate marginalized communities? Or are you just trying to check off some woke box so that people can't accuse you of being racist? By the way, this is how I feel about any writer writing a main character who has a marginalized identity that the author does not. I'm not saying they can't, because I'm not the authority. I'm just saying that you playing with fire and you got to do what you can to make sure you don't burn somebody else or yourself. This was my biggest hang up while reading this book, and so I decided to look in to see if anybody else had this issue with this particular book, and I actually found a Substack post by Alix E. Harrow that talks about this. No, not exactly. Because I don't know if she got any backlash and then she like wrote something to defend herself. That's not what this is. She's just like sharing her thoughts on writing characters of color and like diversifying your cast, I guess. And cultural appropriation. She touches on that in this post as well. And it's actually like good. It seems to me that she's been doing some anti-racism work, some anti-racism education for herself, and she's pretty aware of her privilege. This short post on Substack has more substance to it than like whatever, what's that book called? White Fragility. Fuck that book. She also linked 2 other articles that are about writing diverse characters and cultural appropriation and stuff like that. And I'm going to link all 3 of those posts down below. So if there are any writers watching this, here are some resources for you. So yeah, I'm conflicted because I don't find this book to be problematic or harmful to me personally. But I also don't want to give Alix E. Harrow a pass, you know what I'm saying? I don't love that this story about a biracial girl struggling to find her place to fit into the world was written by a white author who can't know what that experience is like. I really hate how often the main character refers to herself as an in-between thing. I don't like how close to home that hit for me as a biracial person. There are so many scenes where January is being dehumanized and being asked like what she is. That reminded me of what it was like for me growing up. I don't get it as much these days, like ever since I locked up my hair. But goddamn, that brought up some trauma. And I don't love that it's good because I think that this book is good. But I can appreciate that Alix E. Harrow is doing the anti-racism work in some capacity and is using her privilege to criticize whiteness and patriarchy. I think we need more of that in young adult fiction, in publishing in general. And it seems to me that she put a lot of thought and care into it. So is it good? Yeah. Did I enjoy it? Mostly, like I said before, this poked at some old unhealed wounds, like growing up mixed race in an all-white community, not knowing biological parents, stuff like that. So, you know, some of it wasn't fun. Would I recommend it though? Yeah, I would. If you were one of those folks who DNF'd the Starless Sea because it was too meandering or too flowery, this might be a better alternative. And if you do try this book, I'd love to know, you know, if you tried it and if it worked better for you. And if you love stories, about love, about the power of words and magic and shit like this, then I think this book might be for you. Anyways, I think that's it for me this week. Thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you made it to the end. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to get to 1,000 followers, and when I do, I'm going to do a fun couples review video with my wife. We have very different tastes in books, and we're going to give each other a book from our shelves to read and review, and it's going to be really funny. My wife is a pretty funny person, and I think you're all going to like her. If you want to support the channel, support what I'm trying to do here, you can buy me a coffee /tip me. That link will be in the description below. And yeah, I think that's it. So thanks so much for watching. My name is D. Don't fret. I'll see you next time. Peace.